Hello, this is Liz Lawless, your host for Wild West Diversity, where we tell the rarely and untold stories of multicultural contributions to the settling of the American Wild West. Each Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, we'll be sharing a historical legend and a living legend. Someone from history and someone living that Western lifestyle today, keeping it alive for the future generation. We hope you'll join us on Thursday. If not, we'll see you on the trail. Hello, this is Liz Lawless, your host for Wild West Diversity, and this is episode 19. And today we're going to be talking about men of the Wild West. We're going to talk about some of the lesser known Buffalo Soldiers and maybe some of the lesser known cowboys, probably stories and people that you've never heard about before, because that's what this show is all about. This show is about telling those rarely and untold stories of multicultural contributions to the settling of the American Wild West. And so there were 18 medals of honor given to Buffalo soldiers during the 10 years of the Indian Wars. This was the wars that happened after the Civil War. Most of these guys grew up in slavery. They were born into slavery in different parts of the country, a lot of them in Virginia and over on the East Coast. But after the Civil War, they were able to travel and to be free and to go to other places. So a couple of the Buffalo Soldiers we're going to talk about today are Isaiah Mays and Sergeant Benjamin Brown, Corporal Isaiah Mays. And so they both were born into slavery in Virginia. They learned certain skills. One of them worked with a blacksmith. The other one worked with animals and farming and ranching. And so they had these skills as they were growing up. But then the war happened. The Civil War happened. And after the Civil War, people were free to move around. And what happened was in 1866, they established colored troops for the first time. And they established 4 infantry troops and 2 cavalry troops. And so the 2 guys that we're going to be talking about today, Isaiah Mays and Sergeant Benjamin Brown, they were both a part of the 24th Infantry. So they were basically foot soldiers. The cavalry was someone on horseback. An infantryman was someone that walked on foot. And so that's what these 2 guys were. And so they were both, even though they joined up from separate places, Mays joined up in Ohio. Brown had ended up in Pennsylvania, and he enlisted in Pennsylvania. They were both assigned to the 24th Infantry Unit. And so they were under the U.S. Army Payroll Master, Major Joseph Washington Wham. What a great name, Wham. Major Wham. So these 2 guys, Isaiah and Sergeant Brown, which we're going to see a little video about them in a little bit, they were a part of the Major Wham's outfit and unit. And so they were part of a 12-man escort for the payroll on a semi-regular basis. They didn't get paid every week or every 2 weeks or every month like we did, but they did get paid periodically, maybe it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, because they had to travel and they had to, they had to protect that money and stuff. And so with a cry of "Look out, you black sons of bitches," 15 outlaws opened fire on this 12-man escort that would go down fighting that day. So what Mays was shot in both legs. Benjamin Brown was shot in the stomach, and then he was shot in both arms, but he never left the field of battle, Wham said. And Mays, unbeknownst to the rest of them, had crawled away and had crawled 2 miles to try to get help because he knew they were outnumbered. They really didn't tell at first how many outlaws there were, because they came around and there was a big boulder in the middle of the trail there where they were on, and so they were ambushed. And so they fought valiantly, and during that battle, most of these soldiers were injured, and so later on they received medals of honor. A number of other soldiers received certificates of merit during this ambush. And so, anyway, Wham, his clerk, and the soldiers that were mostly injured, they basically had to withdraw, and the bandits, they made off with $28,345 of the payroll. And although later on the money was never recovered, they did capture some suspects and they brought them to trial, but they were tried for stealing, just stealing the money. They were not charged with attempted murder of these 12 soldiers and three or four, I guess the paymaster and his clerk, I mean, the general major. So I guess there was 14 of them. They were never tried for that because of racism and local politics. And so, even though some of them were caught and tried for the stealing the money, they didn't face those charges for the other attempted murder stuff. So Brown never really fully recovered. Sergeant Brown never fully recovered, and he carried some of these bullets in his body until his death. And he had moved later on to back to Washington, D.C., back to the East Coast, and he's buried there in Washington, D.C. Whereas Isaiah Mays, Corporal Mays, he ended up in Arizona. And so he worked there in Arizona for a period of time. Later on, he, I guess, became ill. Tuberculosis was a major disease at that point, and there were few hospitals at that time, and most of the hospitals not only had indigent patients and tuberculosis patients, they also had mental patients. So they were considered asylums, and a lot of them were called sanitariums or asylums instead of hospitals in those early days. And so Isaiah Mays ended up there with illness and obviously shot in both legs. He was never really recovered from those bullet wounds to his legs during this battle. And so he died there in Arizona, and for many, many years his grave went unmarked for decades until eventually the hospital staff and a small group of veterans identified Mays as one of the state's highest recipients of the highest nation's, military honor. They, I guess, had gone back and were looking through the records and saw that there were these Buffalo soldiers who had received the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military honor that you can receive, and that they had not been acknowledged for that. And so Mays was given finally 110 years after being on the field of battle. He finally received his Medal of Honor tombstone, and he, his unmarked grave was found there in the cemetery, and this new headstone was erected in 2001. So 110 years after the fact, he finally got some recognition for that. One of the other Buffalo soldiers that I want to tell you a little bit about today is Henry O. Flipper. And Henry was a second lieutenant, and he was the first African American to graduate from West Point. And so he was born a couple of years before Mays and Brown. And he, like you say, was born into slavery too. He also worked as an apprentice under another gentleman there, learning about, woodwork and cabinet making, things like that. But he always dreamed of being in the military. He wanted to go to West Point. He had heard about it or seen something or met someone, and he wanted to go. And to get in, you had to have a letter of recommendation from a congressman or a senator or someone there. And so the newly elected Georgia Congressman, James Freeman, he corresponded with him. They wrote letters back and forth. And finally, Mr. Freeman recommended Flipper for West Point, and he was accepted, and he went to school and he graduated. He officially entered the academy in 1873, and he graduated in 1877 as the first African American to graduate. And so as a young second lieutenant, he found himself assigned to the 10th Cavalry. I mentioned earlier there were two cavalry units. There was the 9th and the 10th Cavalry, and Flipper was assigned to the 10th Cavalry and immediately sent and stationed at the frontier Fort Sill in Indian Territory. So they had built a series of forts across Texas and Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and coming into Colorado there, because this was still territory. Not all of these places were states at that time. So at Fort Sill, because he had studied engineering and mathematics at West Point, along with military uh, operations and management of troops and soldiers and stuff. He was called upon to build basically, I guess, these trenches and a new drainage system, which later on became known as Flipper's Ditch. And so basically, they were taking these stagnant ponds were causing malaria, and they were causing the men to get sick. And so because of Flipper and his engineering skill, he was able to divert the water and to build these ditches and trenches and things to make them available for clean water and to be able for clean water to flow and not become stagnant. And later on, he was transferred to Fort Concho in 1880. And the same thing, they were there fighting Indians, Apaches at that time, Victorio, which was maybe one of the chiefs you might have heard of if you've studied anything about the Indian Wars. And down near the Rio Grande Valley, especially there in Texas, there were battles that went on for years, and Indians would and blacks and African Americans also would escape into what was Mexico, because Texas was a part of Mexico at that time. And so this was just open territory. And then toward the end, he was stationed at Fort Davis and assigned duties as the acting assistant quartermaster and the acting commissary. So he had kind of worked his way up. And he was doing pretty well, but then all of a sudden they had a new colonel, a William Schaefer, that came in, and he didn't like Flipper very much. It was probably a racist kind of thing, but money disappeared, from the quartermaster's office there and from the commissary. And of course, Flipper, was not responsible for that, but he was trying to figure out what happened to the money and maybe who had stolen this money when they came in and found out. And so they, of course, accused him. And he was court-martialed for that and charged and basically dismissed as for misconduct, even though he was not the one that had stolen the money. But because he had these engineering skills, he went on. And even though his career as a military man was cut short, he did become an engineer and he had these skills. And in 1890, he opened his own engineering firm, an office in Arizona, and continued to work there until the 1940s. And so lived a long time there and had a good life in Arizona after the military. And he did, though, was able to live his dream, because he did dream of going to West Point, and he was able to do that. So that's some of our Buffalo soldiers. And I think we've got a little film here that maybe we can watch, and we'll see. I think we'll see Isaiah Mays first, Corporal Mays, and then we'll see Sergeant Benjamin Brown, and then maybe Mr. Flipper, as well as some of the activity they were engaged in. All right. So you could see there that you saw the pay wagon there. There was they had these wagons, and usually they were drawn by mules. Not only were the supply wagons, but the payroll master wagons were done by that. Um, you saw there West Point. That was the stone building there toward the end. And so these guys were there, and Isaiah Mays was the one there in the suit with the medal on his chest. That was actually the Medal of Honor that he received. And so, by then he was out of the service, so that's why he's in a suit instead of in a uniform. Benjamin Brown, as you saw, had the bigger hat, the more kind of a hat that you would see maybe at the parks and the Canadians and the Mounties. But today, our guys do reenactment. And so we have in Texas, we have 18 Buffalo Soldier groups across the state. And later in July, we'll actually be talking with the head of the program for the Texas Parks and Wildlife, Louise. Will be here with us. And basically, today, these are after school and summer programs that are held at the parks and recreation at the state parks around the state of Texas and at some of the forts, because we still have a number of forts that have been that are historical monuments and have historical markers and that have been rebuilt or that were still in good enough condition that now they've become museums and a part of the park system. So you can go out across West Texas and see these forts and see the remnants of some of these forts that we had, because people after the Civil War began to come into Galveston Island, and then they traveled across to California and New Mexico and Arizona, Utah, and up into Washington State and things. And so that's how people came in. And then these soldiers were responsible for protecting those wagon trains and those people traveling. They built telegraph systems. They found the water places and things like that. So as people traveled west, they knew where to go. They mapped out the territory and did those kinds of things. Usually there was a chaplain that was assigned to the unit as well, to the fort, and the chaplain is the person that taught many of these men to read and write, because there were a number of them that couldn't. Sometimes there was an Emmanuel Stance who was one of the other Buffalo soldiers, and because he was short of stature, they did not want him to re-enlist in the military, and the recruiter kept telling him no, that he couldn't enlist. But finally, because he actually could read and write, because he had learned to read and write, he was able to enlist, even though he was a little bit shorter, maybe, than what they had hoped for when they were hoping these guys would enlist. So four infantry groups and two cavalry troops. You can read more about them. They'll be on our e-newsletter at wildwestdiversity.com. You can go there and subscribe and sign up, and that will get you the written versions of these stories. You also can go back at any time and listen to our other 18 interviews and shows that we've had previously. So you can hear about rodeo, you can hear about artists, you can hear about retail stores, Western stores, and products that we have for that. And shortly, we're going to be giving away a Sidekick wallet. So we've got a couple of Sidekick wallets. Lance was here a few weeks ago, and we're going to be giving that away. And we're going to give that away to people that sign up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, click on that red button. If you haven't been there yet, if you've been watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, you can go to YouTube and search Wild West Diversity, and you'll find our channel there, and you'll see those 18 episodes. So this will be episode 19, and it'll be up shortly. If you're listening from a podcast, if you happen to find this on our podcast channel, we pull each of our interviews down and we do a podcast. So It is available across podcast platforms. So if you just go to your favorite podcast platform and type in Wild West Diversity, you'll be able to listen to these stories about these interesting people who are just ordinary people like you and I, but they lived extraordinary lives because of the choices that they made. And they survived in difficult times, you know. What do you think? What would it be like to go into an unknown territory and not know what you were going to find? You didn't know if you were going to find water or bandits or Indians or whatever, animals, bears, snakes, whatever it had to be. They were going into this unknown territory. And so, ordinary people, but they were looking for a better life. Most of them were traveling west because they wanted to build a new life for themselves, or they wanted to build a better life for their family. And so that's some of our Buffalo Soldiers. I hope you'll check them out. I hope you'll go and read more about them. I hope you'll listen to our recordings about them. And we did an interview previously with Sam Allen, Sergeant Sam Allen of the North Texas Buffalo Soldiers. This is one of those state programs I was talking about where they work with kids in an after school program with kids from the juvenile justice system, because they were just so tired. Him and his brother were both police officers, African American police officers, and they just were tired of seeing the kids come back through. And so they wanted to give those kids an opportunity and a chance for a different life and to make different choices. And so they, as a part of teaching them their heritage, their proud heritage of these Buffalo Soldiers, these Black soldiers that served, they got to be around horses. They learn about the history. They learn to take care of horses. They learn to cook out. They learn to fish. They learn to do a lot of these activities. And so it takes them out of their normal environment and puts them in a new environment and maybe gives them an opportunity for a different life. So we have a lot of those programs. Those programs need volunteers. So if you have any interest in anything like that, you can email us at wildwestdiversity@gmail.com, and we would be happy to talk to you then about these programs and tell you about maybe programs in your area if you're down in the Austin area, if you're down in Lockhart, Houston, West Texas, especially like you say at Fort Davis. And there are a lot of these programs at San Angelo, the other side and south of Fort Worth. There are programs down there as well. So look into that and see what you can find out about some of these guys. And you also obviously can always go to Western Legends, Yesterday and Today, where a lot of these characters are. We have these 31 stories about African Americans from yesterday and today. And you can find that. The ebook is available there at Amazon. It's Western Legends, Yesterday and Today. Elizabeth Lawless, you can find that under my name. And so, or you can just search Elizabeth Lawless, I'm sure it'll come up. But the ebook's available. We're in the process of creating a children's book based on these stories. So we are taking these characters that we've been talking about today, and we're creating a children's book, and we're telling their stories for younger children. We're creating those books, and that book will be available later here in July. So we're very excited about that. And there will actually be two books. The first book will be Historical Legends, which are these guys that lived in the 1800s, early 1900s. And then we'll also have a second book, which will be our Living Legends. So that will have a lot of our guys, like you say, that were born in the 1900s, the early mid 1900s, and that are currently living today, keeping this legacy alive. So you'll be wanting to look for that, and that will be up shortly. You'll be able to find that on Amazon as well, and it will be called the Western Legends series, and it'll be, African Americans of yesterday, Western Legends yesterday. And so look for that. We'll also be talking about it here more on the show. Again, if you'll go to the YouTube channel and sign up, you can sign up at our YouTube and subscribe, and then we will check those names. We will check those subscribers, and we will put you in the drawing for our Sidekick wallet. So I'm very excited about that. I'll be showing that next week. and we'll be giving you more direct plans for that, and the time frame and all of that kind of stuff. But anybody that subscribes will be put in that drawing. So go to our YouTube channel, punch the red button, and then you'll get notification when a new video goes up. So we appreciate that very much. Got a few minutes here left. I think I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about what's coming up, some of the shows that are coming up, and we'll save our cattlemen for next time. We'll talk about our cattlemen in July. We were going to talk about Matthew Bones Hook, who was the first African American to join the Western Cattlemen's Association, lived in Amarillo, created towns, brought African Americans out, families, 35 families, and because he wanted them to experience the great openness of West Texas. He loved West Texas when he got there, and he was a horse trainer, and he worked the ranches in his early days and had a partner that trained horses. And so he just loved it so much. And he was a Christian. He was a church going man. And so he brought a pastor out from Fort Worth and then these families. So I want to tell you more about Matthew at another time. Bill Pickett as well. Bill Pickett from Taylor, Texas. Most people know about Bill Pickett. He is the one rodeo cowboy that a lot of people have heard about. He grew up not too far down the road here in Taylor, Texas, and then he worked the Ranch 101 Ranch in Oklahoma. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Bill and later on in August as well. But coming up in the next 4 weeks, I am really just excited and delighted that we're going to have Eddie Martinez with Martinez Bulls. So his father Tino grew up as a boy in Mexico, and he loved the bulls. He always dreamed of having bulls himself and having a ranch, and but he was just a poor kid, but he made his way to the U.S. He went to work here in the U.S. and he started a restaurant. He worked in another restaurant until he kind of worked his way up, and then he bought the restaurant from the gentleman that owned the restaurant, and then he expanded that restaurant, and then he created another restaurant, and so from his restaurant business, he made enough money that he was able to buy a ranch and start buying some of these bulls. And so, very interesting story, family legacy there, where his son and him are engaged in taking bulls to the rodeo. So you'll see these huge bulls. They're beautiful animals, but they can stop you. You want to be careful. Some of them are like kids, and they'll follow you around like a dog or a cat, but some of them are not so friendly. So you got to be really careful. But we'll hear about Eddie Martinez. We'll hear from Eddie. Then we'll be talking with Abe Morris. And Abe Morris is another one of our African-American rodeo cowboys, rodeo announcers. You heard earlier in the year, Kevin Woodson, our Cowboys of Color rodeo announcer. And Abe is from Colorado. He lives up in Denver. And so he was not only a bull rider, he went to college on a rodeo scholarship out in Wyoming. He's from New Jersey originally, which is kind of interesting, but he had cousins that were in the rodeo, and he got into rodeo and then went to college on a rodeo scholarship and became a bull rider. And then after his bull riding days, he became a rodeo announcer, and he is an author. He has a book called My Cowboy Hat Still Fits, about his rodeo life. And he also has another book called because he fought for years to get custody of his son. And today he works in the financial industry, but he also bakes cookies. So he may be the next Mrs. Fields. So he has cowboy chocolate chip cookies, and they're just fabulous. And he began to take those to the rodeos, and everybody always wanted to know where those cookies were. So I'm hoping that Abe sends us some cookies, Russ, for you and me to be having some. But he will be here with us talking about his life and his experiences. And then we'll have Russ T. Crawdaddy is going to be here with us, and really just want y'all to meet Russ, because Russ is going to a part of our team, and he is going to be going out to the ranches and spending the day on the ranch with a lot of our cowboys and cowgirls, and doing kind of the man on the ranch kind of episode for us. So we will periodically feed in these episodes where Russ is going to be out on the road, checking in with a lot of our contestants and the people living that lifestyle every day and taking care of horses and taking care of animals and ranching and cattle and all of that kind of stuff. So we'll be excited to be talking to Russ. And then, like I say, at the end of the month, we'll be talking with Luis. We'll be talking with Luis about the Texas Buffalo Soldier program. It is the only multicultural program for the state parks of the state of Texas. It's a park program that is basically run by the state of Texas and funded and managed by them. And like I say, they are out in the park showing people and cooks and families how to cook outdoors, how to fish, how to hunt. They set up the tents that you saw in the pictures. Some of those pictures you saw were reenactments that we do at rodeos and in the parks and at community centers and recreation centers and schools. We do a lot of work with schools during the school year, send out speakers. And so be really excited to show you that. And I'm sure they've got some great videos too that we'll be sharing with you. So come back and see us. This has been Liz Lawless, the host for Wild West Diversity. And we're here every Thursday from 5 to 5:30. We're telling those rarely and untold stories of the American Wild West about people that you probably never have heard about before. So we hope you'll come back on Thursday. We hope you'll share these stories with your friends. We hope you'll go and subscribe and listen to our channel on YouTube, on the podcast, the different podcast platforms, and that you'll go to wildwestdiversity.com and sign up, put your email in. It's free to subscribe to our e-newsletter, and that way you'll get notification when the new story goes up. You'll know what's coming up in the next few weeks. And so thanks so much for watching and listening today, and we'll see you on the trail, or we'll see you next Thursday. Hello, this is Liz Lawless, your host for Wild West Diversity, where we tell the rarely and untold stories of multicultural contributions to the settling of the American Wild West. Each Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, we'll be sharing a historical legend and a living legend. Someone from history and someone living that Western lifestyle today, keeping it alive for the future generation. We hope you'll join us on Thursday. If not, we'll see you on the trail.